My name is Mandy Pierce, and I will never forget the moment my manager told me that my husband's life didn't matter. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind of day where the rain looks tired before it even hits the ground. I was standing in the staff break room of Halpern Logistics, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles went white. The nurse on the other end had just said words that made my body go cold. "He's critical. You need to come now." My husband Daniel had collapsed at work. Massive heart attack. He was 42, the kind of man who still jogged in the morning and believed he'd live to 90. I burst into my manager's office. "Mark, it's Daniel," I said, breathless. "He's in the hospital. They don't know if he'll make it. I need the week off." Mark looked up from his computer, slowly, like I'd interrupted him while he was trying to solve world peace. "You know we're short-staffed," he said flatly. "Work comes first, Mandy. Cover your shift or don't come back." For a moment, I actually thought I'd misheard him. The company had preached about family values in every meeting. They gave speeches about loyalty, teamwork, empathy. But when I stood there, shaking, desperate, Mark didn't even blink. "Mark, he's my husband," I whispered. He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "We all have personal problems. I can't set a precedent for special treatment." Something inside me cracked. I'd worked there for 9 years. No sick days, no late arrivals, no complaints. I'd covered for others when they partied, volunteered for double shifts, even worked holidays. I had given that company everything. And in return, I was disposable. Before I could respond, he added, "If you walk out that door, consider it your resignation." I didn't walk out. I ran. The drive to the hospital blurred by in a haze of rain, red lights, and silent prayers. When I finally reached the emergency wing, Daniel was lying there surrounded by machines that beeped in mechanical rhythm, a fragile reminder he was still alive. He was pale, tubes snaking from his arms. The doctors told me he'd made it through surgery, but the next 48 hours would decide everything. I didn't leave his side. For 6 days, I lived in that hospital. I ate from vending machines, washed my face in public sinks, and slept in the hard plastic chair next to his bed. I texted my team to explain what happened, but no one replied. The silence from work felt deafening. On the morning of the 7th day, Daniel finally opened his eyes. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "You look exhausted," he said. "You should go home." I smiled through tears. Home can wait. But when I finally did go home that evening, I found an email waiting in my inbox. Subject: termination notice. Body: failure to appear for scheduled shifts without prior approval constitutes job abandonment. Your employment with Halpern Logistics has been terminated effective immediately. I stared at the screen, the words bleeding into each other. Job abandonment. As if caring for the man who'd nearly died was some kind of crime. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just sat there. Quiet. Empty. The way you feel when the last piece of something you believed in shatters. The next week was survival mode. Daniel was recovering slowly. The medical bills were stacking up, and I had no income. I started applying for new jobs, but word spreads fast in logistics. Apparently, Mark had told people I was unreliable, that I disappeared during a critical week. Every email rejection hit harder than the last. But life has a way of testing how much a person can take before they change. One afternoon, while Daniel was resting, I went through our mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short typewritten note. "If you want the truth about Halpern Logistics, look in storage unit 307. No signature. No explanation. At first, I thought it was a prank, until I saw the small company logo, watermark faintly visible behind the text. The same logo printed on my old employee badge. My pulse quickened. I hadn't even told anyone I'd been fired yet. Who could have sent this? I told myself to ignore it. I needed to focus on Daniel, on rebuilding, on peace. But at night, lying awake, listening to his soft breathing, my mind kept circling back to that note. The truth about Halpern Logistics. I'd worked there nearly a decade. What truth could I possibly not know? By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove across town to the self-storage facility listed on the envelope. The air was heavy with rain again, like the day everything began. Unit 307 was near the back, half hidden under a flickering light. My hands trembled as I entered the code and pulled the metal door upward. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, neatly stacked and labeled. On the top of one was a folder marked Payroll Records, 2020 to 2024. Curiosity turned to dread as I flipped it open. The numbers didn't make sense. Employee deductions that never appeared on pay stubs, payments to non-existent workers, names I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as realization crept in. Halpern Logistics wasn't just a toxic workplace. It was hiding something far worse. I didn't know it yet, but uncovering what was in those boxes would bring the FBI, the CEO, and the ghosts of my company's lies straight to my doorstep. And the man who once told me work comes first would soon wish he had never spoken those words. Because by the time this was over, I wouldn't just expose the truth. I'd redefine what justice really means. The smell of damp cardboard and dust hit me the moment I stepped into storage unit 307. The air felt heavy, stale, like the place hadn't been opened in years. My phone flashlight cut across rows of labeled boxes stacked with military precision, each one marked with dates, department codes, and red stamps that read confidential. My pulse quickened. Whoever sent me here knew exactly what I'd find. The top box was labeled Payroll Records, 2020 to 2024. I opened it carefully, half expecting rats to jump out. Inside were thick binders, USB drives, and folders stuffed with printouts of spreadsheets. Every document bore Halpern's corporate header. I recognized some names: warehouse workers, shift supervisors, even people from the administrative office. But there were also names I didn't recognize at all. Hundreds of them. Each employee supposedly receiving bi-weekly deposits, except the bank accounts listed were identical. My stomach turned. Fake employees, duplicate accounts, funds being funneled somewhere. I flipped deeper into the files and found internal memos signed by Mark Lanning, my former manager. His signature was everywhere. Payroll authorizations, overtime approvals, even termination requests. But the handwriting wasn't his. Someone had forged his name on at least half of them. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. If this was what I thought it was, Halpern wasn't just mishandling money, they were committing large-scale payroll fraud. A noise outside made me freeze. Footsteps. I killed my flashlight and held my breath. A shadow passed across the thin gap under the door. For a few long seconds, the footsteps paused right outside, then slowly moved away. I waited another full minute before exhaling and slipping out of the unit. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. By the time I reached my car, rain had started to fall again. Steady, cold, and relentless. I sat in the driver's seat staring at the photos on my phone. My husband was still recovering at home. I should have gone back to him. But the part of me that had spent years being ignored and belittled refused to stop now. Halpern Logistics had fired me for abandonment. Maybe it was time they learned what real abandonment felt like, when every secret they buried came clawing to the surface. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up cross-referencing what I'd found with old pay stubs I'd kept in a drawer. The deductions never added up. Even my own pay had discrepancies. Overtime hours missing, insurance fees double-charged. At 2 a.m., I realized what those duplicate accounts meant. Someone was laundering company money through ghost employees, and whoever managed payroll was involved. I thought of Mark again. The man who'd told me work came first. The one who threatened to ruin my career. Maybe this was his game. Maybe he was protecting more than just schedules when he refused my leave. The next morning, I drove to the hospital cafeteria to see Daniel. He looked stronger, color returning to his cheeks, though he could see the exhaustion etched into mine. "Mandy," he said softly, "whatever you're doing, stop before it consumes you." I hesitated. If you saw what I saw, you wouldn't sleep either. He reached for my hand. They already took your job. Don't let them take your peace too. But peace felt impossible. I spent the next 3 days gathering proof. I went back to the storage unit twice, photographing files, scanning documents into my laptop. Each visit made me more anxious. I kept thinking someone was following me. A white sedan seemed to appear wherever I parked. Same dented bumper, same cracked taillight. By the 3rd day, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I decided to contact someone who'd left Halpern last year. Evan Ross, an accountant I'd worked with in payroll. He'd always seemed uncomfortable around Mark, like he knew more than he could say. When I called, Evan sounded startled. Mandy? You shouldn't be calling me, I found something, I said. Files. Payroll records that don't make sense. There was a pause long enough to make me think the line had gone dead. Then, quietly, he said, Where did you get them? Storage Unit 307. Another pause. Mandy, listen carefully. Don't tell anyone else. Halpern's been under federal review for months. The FBI's involved. They're investigating Mark and others for embezzlement. That storage unit? It's evidence the world tilted. Evidence? Then why would someone send me there? I don't know, he said urgently. But if you took anything, you need to put it back. Immediately, I looked at the flash drive sitting beside my laptop. My chest tightened. It's too late for that. Mandy, he said, voice sharp now. You have no idea what you're mixed up in. Return it, or you'll end up in the middle of a federal case. Before I could reply, the line went dead. That night, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. But tucked into the doorframe was another envelope. Inside was a single printed sentence. You shouldn't have opened those boxes. No signature. No explanation. I closed every curtain in the apartment and sat beside Daniel's hospital bed, clutching his hand like it could anchor me. He was asleep, unaware of the storm brewing outside our fragile calm. Whoever sent the first note wanted me to find the truth. Whoever sent this one wanted me to stop. And deep down, I already knew I wouldn't. Because Halpern Logistics hadn't just fired me. They'd built their empire on lies, and someone thought I was too small to matter. But they were about to learn. When you push a person to the edge, sometimes they don't fall. They rise. And when I returned to that company a week later, everything would explode. Because the CEO and the FBI would already be waiting for me. When my phone rang at 7:12 on Monday morning, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed Halpern Logistics, corporate office. For a full minute, I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, but curiosity, or maybe defiance, made me swipe accept. A calm voice spoke. Mrs. Pierce, this is Dana Reeves, assistant to CEO Alan Halpern. Mr. Halpern has requested to meet with you today regarding an internal matter. 10 a.m., corporate headquarters. My throat tightened. I don't work there anymore. Her tone didn't change. Mr. Halpern insists this is important. It would be in your best interest to attend. Before I could ask anything else, she hung up. I stared at the phone, a sick feeling crawling up my spine. Daniel was still recovering, and I didn't want to leave him, but something told me this meeting wasn't optional. I didn't know it yet, but that single phone call would change everything. By 10 sharp, I was walking through the glass doors of Halpern Logistics for the first time since being fired. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me. They're expecting you, she said quietly, pointing toward the conference wing. The building felt different. Too quiet. Too polished. The kind of silence that means everyone's holding their breath. When I pushed open the conference room door, 2 men in dark suits were already seated across from Alan Halpern, the CEO himself. I recognized one of the men immediately. Special Agent Carter, FBI. The other introduced himself as Agent Morales. Mrs. Pierce, Halpern said, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." My voice wavered. "You fired me by email. Why am I here?" He clasped his hands together. "Because your name has come up in an active federal investigation." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" Agent Carter slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed photos of me entering storage unit 307, me loading boxes into my car, me walking out under the dim yellow lights. The timestamp glowed on every corner. "How did you—" "Security footage," Carter said calmly. "The unit belongs to Halpern Logistics. It was sealed under an FBI warrant 6 weeks ago. You broke into an evidence site my breath caught." "I didn't break in. Someone sent me a note." Morales leaned forward. "We know. We found both letters in your mailbox. Fingerprint analysis shows they were typed and handled with gloves. I swallowed hard." "Then you know someone set me up." Halpern's expression was unreadable. "That depends on what you did with the materials you took." I hesitated. Lying wasn't an option. "I photographed some files and copied one flash drive. I didn't know it was evidence." Carter's jaw tightened. "That flash drive contains payroll data directly tied to a $14.8 million embezzlement scheme. You could be facing obstruction of justice charges." The room spun. "You can't be serious." "I lost my job because of that company, because your manager refused to let me see my dying husband." My voice cracked. "You're telling me I'm the criminal?" Carter's tone softened slightly. "We're not saying that yet." "But we need the drive." I reached into my bag with shaking hands and slid it across the table. "Take it. I don't want anything to do with this." Morales picked it up carefully, gloved, and placed it in an evidence pouch. Halpern leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Pierce, Mark Lanning no longer works here. He was arrested last night." My heart stopped. "Arrested? For what?" "Wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering," Carter said. "Your photos from that unit were the missing link. Without knowing it, you gave us the last piece of the puzzle." I sat there, speechless. The anger I'd carried for weeks, the humiliation, the fear, it all twisted into confusion. "Then why call me in like a suspect?" Halpern folded his hands again. "Because we needed to confirm whether you were involved willingly. And because someone inside our company deliberately led you to that storage unit. We need to know who I thought of the first envelope, the watermark, the faint impression of the Halpern logo. Someone with access to corporate stationery had sent it." My mind replayed every conversation I'd had at the company, every uneasy glance, every hushed hallway whisper. Then a memory clicked. Evan Ross, the accountant who'd warned me over the phone, the one who'd told me the FBI was already investigating. He'd quit right before things started unraveling. "Evan?" I whispered. "It has to be him." Morales nodded slowly. "That name's already on our radar. He disappeared last week, along with nearly $500,000 in unaccounted transfers. We believe he tried to shift blame onto others before fleeing." So the note wasn't meant to expose corruption. It was bait. Evan had used me as a pawn, knowing my anger would lead me straight to the evidence, leaving my fingerprints all over the scene. Carter slid a business card toward me. "We may need your testimony once the case proceeds. Until then, don't discuss this with anyone. And if you receive any more messages, contact us immediately." I nodded numbly and stood to leave. Halpern stopped me at the door. "Mrs. Pierce, I know words mean little now, but I'm sorry. What happened with Mark was inexcusable. If you ever consider coming back—" I turned slowly. "Coming back?" My voice was steady now, colder. "You built a company where empathy meant weakness, where loyalty only went one way. You don't need me back. You need to rebuild your conscience." Halpern looked down, and for the first time I saw shame flicker across his face. When I stepped outside, the autumn air hit sharp and cold. Reporters were already gathering near the entrance, shouting questions about arrests and investigations. I kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. You weren't supposed to talk to them. No signature, no number trace. The text vanished seconds later, deleted remotely. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The FBI might think Evan was gone, but someone else was still watching, and somehow I had just become the center of a storm that was far from over. The night after the FBI meeting, I couldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying everything in my head. The photos, the flash drive, the text that had deleted itself. Whoever sent that message wasn't done with me. Daniel was home from the hospital now, still weak but slowly improving. His skin had color again, his humor was returning, and he kept trying to convince me to sleep. "Whatever they're dragging you into, Mandy, it's not worth it," he said, resting a hand on mine. "Let the FBI handle it." "I can't," I whispered. "Someone wanted me blamed for this." "I need to know who and why," he sighed, squeezing my fingers. "Then promise me one thing. Don't do it alone." I promised. I meant it when I said it. But by morning, that promise was already broken. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A new email. No sender name, just a single line of text. "You want answers? Check locker 112 at the Westfield bus terminal." I stared at it for a long moment, my pulse quickening. Evan was gone. The FBI thought he'd fled with stolen money, but if he was still around, this was his way of communicating. Indirect, untraceable. I told Daniel I had to run errands. He looked suspicious but didn't press. He'd been through enough. The Westfield terminal was crowded, people rushing between platforms, luggage wheels squeaking on the tiles. I found locker 112 easily. The combination, 3179, was scribbled on the inside of the email. I entered it, half expecting nothing. The locker opened with a metallic click. Inside was a single manila envelope and a cheap prepaid phone. My heart thudded as I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of wire transfer receipts, each stamped with Halpern Logistics headers. But the signatures didn't belong to Mark or Evan. They were signed by Alan Halpern himself. For a second, my breath caught. The CEO. The same man who'd looked me in the eye and apologized yesterday. Attached to one receipt was a handwritten note. "Mark took the fall. Halpern runs everything. They'll bury the truth before the FBI sees it. Don't trust anyone." My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe Evan was lying to save himself? But the receipts looked real, complete with digital authorizations. One transfer led to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. Another to a company registered under a fake name that I recognized. The same supplier I used to process invoices for. The CEO wasn't innocent. He was orchestrating the fraud. My stomach turned as realization sank in. The entire FBI narrative, that Mark and Evan were responsible, was only half true. They were pawns, and Halpern was the one holding the board. I pocketed the prepaid phone and envelope and left the station as calmly as I could. But as I approached my car, a black sedan pulled up behind me. The windows were tinted, engine idling. A voice called from the driver's seat. "Mrs. Pierce?" I froze. The door opened and Agent Carter stepped out, holding up his badge. "We need to talk." He gestured for me to sit in the back seat. "You've been busy," he said quietly, setting the envelope on his lap. "We've been monitoring your digital activity. We know you were at the terminal." I stared at him, speechless. "How?" "We traced the burner email. Whoever sent it is still in the city, and they want you involved." Carter opened the envelope, glancing through the receipts. "These are serious accusations. But if this is real, Halpern could face decades in prison. Did you know he withdrew $2.7 million in personal consulting bonuses last quarter?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. "So it's true." Carter nodded grimly. "We suspected it. But these documents give us probable cause. What we don't know is how he's moving the funds now that we've frozen his accounts." I looked at the prepaid phone. Maybe that's why Evan contacted me. Carter studied me for a moment. "Mrs. Pierce, whoever's feeding you this information is playing a dangerous game." You could get hurt. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He answered, listening silently for a few seconds, then his face changed. What hospital? He asked sharply. My heart dropped. What happened? He ended the call and looked at me. Your husband was just admitted to County General. Someone broke into your apartment. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I just remember the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Daniel was conscious but shaken. A bruise was forming along his temple. They were looking for something, he said weakly. They kept asking where you were. I felt my knees buckle. Who? He shook his head. Didn't say. Just 2 men, suits, quiet voices. They left when I said I didn't know anything. I turned to Carter, who'd followed me in. His jaw was tight. This isn't just about corporate fraud anymore. Someone's trying to silence witnesses. He placed a protective detail outside Daniel's room and told me to go somewhere safe. But I couldn't. I sat by Daniel's bed all night, gripping his hand, watching every shadow that passed the doorway. Around 2 a.m., his eyes fluttered open. You can stop now, Mandy, he murmured. Let it go. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I thought of the men who'd broken into our home, of Halpern sitting behind his glass desk pretending to care, of every worker whose paycheck had been stolen to fund his empire. Let it go? Number, not yet. By morning, I had made my decision. If Halpern thought firing me had erased my worth, if he thought fear would keep me quiet, he'd miscalculated. I still had the prepaid phone, and one unread message blinked on the screen. If you want proof, meet me tomorrow. 6 p.m., Riverside parking lot. Come alone, I looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, then whispered to myself, for both of us. This ends tomorrow. I didn't know if it would bring justice or destroy everything I had left, but I was going to find out who sent that message, even if it was the last thing I ever did. The next evening, I sat in my car at the Riverside parking lot, watching the sun sink below the highway bridge. The air smelled of gasoline and rain. Every instinct in me screamed that this was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. Too many lies, too many people hurt. At 6:04 p.m., a gray sedan pulled into the far corner and idled for a moment before the driver stepped out. My heart stopped when I saw his face. Evan Ross. He looked nothing like the neat accountant I remembered. His beard was grown out, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he wore a cheap jacket that didn't fit. He glanced around nervously, then approached my car. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. You're supposed to be gone. I didn't steal that money, Mandy, he said quickly. Halpern set me up. I took copies of everything to protect myself. The I doesn't know the half of it. I opened the door slowly. You're the one who sent the notes? He nodded. I needed someone they wouldn't suspect to find the files. You were perfect. Fired, angry, invisible to them, I felt a sting in my chest. You used me. I'm sorry, he said. But you have to understand. Halpern's still moving money through shell companies under different names. The FBI froze what they found, but he's already rebuilt the network overseas. I have proof. Emails, wire transfers, private ledgers. It's enough to take him down for good. He handed me a flash drive. This is everything. Get it to Agent Carter. I took it, staring at the small piece of plastic that suddenly felt heavier than the car itself. Why me? Because they already think you're involved, he said. You're the only one who can walk in there without raising alarms. Before I could respond, headlights flared across the lot. A black SUV rolled in fast, tires splashing through puddles. Evan's face drained of color. It's him, he whispered. The driver's door opened, and Alan Halpern stepped out, flanked by 2 men in suits. He wasn't supposed to be here. The FBI had frozen his accounts, stripped his authority. But the look on his face told me power like his didn't fade overnight. Well, Halpern said, his voice smooth as ever. The runaway accountant and the disgraced employee. What a reunion, Evan stepped forward. It's over, Alan. The files are out. You can't hide anymore. Halpern smirked. You think I'd come here without knowing exactly what you've done? The FBI isn't after me anymore. They're after you, and she, he pointed at me, is a convenient witness they can't trust. Two men moved closer. Evan tensed. Run, he muttered. I froze. I'm not leaving you. He shoved me toward my car. Now. Gunshots shattered the air. I ducked behind the door as Evan hit the ground. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, drowning in the rain. Halpern shouted something, but I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. I didn't think. I just ran. I hit the ignition, tires squealing, heart hammering. In the rearview mirror, I saw Evan lying motionless, Halpern's men dragging him toward the SUV. My mind screamed to stop, to help him, but survival took over. I drove straight to the FBI field office, engine still running when I jumped out. Security tried to stop me, but I yelled for Agent Carter, waving the flash drive like it was a lifeline. Within minutes, I was in a small interrogation room, soaked, shaking, explaining everything. Carter listened silently as technicians plugged in the drive. Rows of encrypted spreadsheets filled the screen. Offshore accounts, fake invoices, private transfers, all signed by Alan Halpern. Carter's eyes widened. This is it, he said. This is what we needed. He radioed his team. Within an hour, federal agents were swarming Halpern's estate. By midnight, news outlets reported his arrest. Charges: fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and attempted homicide. Evan's body was found near the riverbank. He hadn't survived. When they told me, I just sat there, numb. The man who dragged me into this mess had died trying to end it. And the man who'd built an empire on stolen wages was finally behind bars. Weeks passed. Daniel recovered slowly. Physically first, emotionally later. The night I told him it was over, he just pulled me close and whispered, "You did what they never expected. You fought back." Halpern pleaded guilty months later after the FBI traced over 20 shell corporations to his personal accounts. His sentence: 40 years in federal prison. I attended the sentencing quietly from the back row. When he was led away in cuffs, our eyes met for a brief second. There was no rage, no triumph, just the hollow realization that greed had destroyed him long before the law did. Evan's flash drive had contained something else, too. A note hidden in the final folder. If you make it out, don't waste this. Use it for good. I couldn't forget those words. Using the settlement money I received as a whistleblower, I helped start a small organization, a legal fund for employees wrongfully terminated or exploited by their companies. We called it the Pierce Initiative. I hired former Halpern workers who'd lost their jobs when the company collapsed. Our first case? A warehouse manager fired after asking for time off to care for his sick mother. I didn't need to think twice. We'll represent him, I told my team. No one should ever have to choose between family and a paycheck. Sometimes I still wake up at night hearing the echo of those gunshots, seeing Evan's face, remembering the rain-soaked parking lot. But when I look at Daniel sleeping peacefully beside me, I remind myself why I did it. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet promise kept. To the people who believed they didn't matter. Mark is still serving his sentence. Halpern's empire is gone. And the same woman they called unreliable now fights for workers across the country. Maybe revenge isn't about destroying someone else. Maybe it's about rebuilding what they tried to break inside you. For me, it started with a simple choice: to walk out that door. And it ended with something I never expected: peace.